If you'd told me last year that a 30-year-old sailboat would nearly destroy a neighborhood, I'd have laughed in your face. But then again, I hadn't met Karen Whitmore yet. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because it was the first morning in weeks I actually felt calm. After finalizing a grueling divorce and walking away from 15 years of something that had stopped feeling like home, I'd bought a small lakefront property in Greenpine. 2 stories, cedar siding, wraparound porch, and a private dock that dipped out into the cool, glassy waters of Greenpine Lake. A fresh start. A sanctuary. And at that dock, rocking gently like it had for decades, was the Whisperer, my father's old Pearson sloop. Classic navy blue hull, bright teak trim, and more memories than I could count. It wasn't just a boat. It was the last piece of him I had left. That morning, the light was golden across the lake. Ospreys flew overhead. The breeze was steady from the north. I sat on my deck, coffee in hand, and thought, for the first time in a long time, I'm gonna be okay. Then I saw the envelope. Cream paper, gold embossed lettering. Lakeside Estates HOA, official correspondence. It was tucked neatly into the box, as if it hadn't come to destroy anything. But destruction rarely knocks loud. Inside, the language was cold and clinical. Dear Mr. Carter, it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association that the watercraft currently docked at your property does not comply with the aesthetic standards outlined by the community guidelines. You are hereby ordered to remove the vessel within 30 days or incur a penalty of $100 per day. I blinked. Read it again. And again. Aesthetic standards? I hadn't heard a single word about boat appearance when I bought the house. And the Whisperer? That boat was spotless. I'd spent hours polishing its brass fittings, cleaning the sails, and refinishing the deck boards with marine-grade varnish. She was a classic, not a rust bucket. But HOA President Karen Whitmore didn't seem to think so. I didn't know much about Karen then, just that she'd been recently elected and was apparently making a name for herself. Mid-50s. Perpetually overdressed. Blonde bob cut sharper than her tone. And a gaze that made you feel like you owed her rent just for breathing in her direction. I called my neighbor Bob Martinez that afternoon. Retired Navy. No nonsense. He lived 2 doors down and had been around since the development broke ground. Yeah. She's a piece of work, he said, shaking his head. New sheriff in town. At least that's how she acts. You're not the first she's targeted. Last month she fined the Rinsons for their mailbox color. Said it clashed with the neighborhood's energy. Whatever that means. But the boat? I asked. Are there actual rules about this? Bob leaned back in his deck chair, eyes narrowing. Not a damn word. Been here 20 years. People have had everything from fishing skiffs to damn near yachts. This is personal. That night, I walked down to the dock. The sky was turning purple. The Whisperer swayed gently under the starlight, hull glinting like a sapphire. I sat on the edge, feet dangling over the water, and ran my fingers along the railing he'd varnished so carefully. My dad had taught me to sail on this boat when I was 10. I still remembered the way his hands had covered mine on the tiller, the sound of his voice calling out wind direction. The way he'd smile when we caught the breeze just right. And now some petty dictator with a clipboard wanted to erase all that? Because it didn't match her vision? I could have taken the easy route. Hauled the boat to dry dock. Avoided the fines. Let it end there. But that would have meant letting her win. Letting her rewrite the story of this place. Letting her bury my father's legacy under a pile of HOA paperwork and nonsense. I didn't know it then. But that moment, me sitting on that dock, fists clenched in the night air, was the beginning of a war. Not just for a boat. For the right to live without being trampled by someone else's ego. Karen Whitmore had declared battle. And I was about to show her that she'd picked the wrong man, the wrong dock, and absolutely the wrong boat. By week 3, the letters had taken on a rhythm. Every Tuesday, like clockwork, a new envelope showed up in my mailbox. Always the same gold embossed letterhead. Always the same veiled threats. But each week, The wording grew nastier. You are in direct violation of Lakeside Estates aesthetic guidelines. Failure to comply will result in daily compounded fines. The HOA reserves the right to remediate non-compliant conditions at the homeowner's expense. They were trying to break me. And maybe it would have worked, if they hadn't made a mistake. It started on a sleepless Thursday night. I sat at my desk. The HOA letters spread out before me like a trail of breadcrumbs left by a bureaucratic predator. Each one was a little more absurd than the last. The latest had warned of possible legal action and contractor intervention. Meaning, they'd come take the boat by force if I didn't move it. That's when I pulled out the old file drawer. Back when I bought the house, the title company had included a thick stack of historical documents, surveys, deed descriptions, plat maps. Most of it I had skimmed and filed away. But now? I needed ammunition. Hours passed as I sifted through the paperwork. Flashlight in one hand, whiskey in the other. Then I found it. A yellowed copy of a survey dated June 1997. It showed the layout of the properties around the lake, each lot clearly marked. My eyes drifted toward the edge of my parcel, then narrowed. There, just beyond the tree line, was a thin strip of land, a narrow access path that curved down from the main community trail to the marina. It was shaded in with the same hatch marks as my property. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I dug deeper, pulled the county's GIS records, cross-referenced them with tax parcel data, even used Google Earth to compare the lines. And there it was. That little path, the only land access to the community marina, was legally mine. The HOA had been trespassing for years, maintaining it, hosting events on it, building pavilions and boat slips as if it were public. But the survey, the deeds, the tax records, they all said the same thing, that land had never been formally deeded to the HOA. It had always been part of Lot 17. My lot. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I called Grace Monroe first thing the next morning. She lived 2 houses down. Real estate attorney. Smart. Sharp-tongued. And one of the few people in Lakeside Estates not afraid of Karen Whitmore. Daniel, she said, sipping from a thermos of what I swear was rocket fuel. If what you're saying is true, that changes everything. I showed her the maps, the surveys, the legal descriptions. She flipped through them slowly, eyes scanning like a hawk over field mice. This, she said, tapping a boundary line, is gold. You're sure it holds up? Not only does it hold up, she said, sitting back in her chair. Karen's been using HOA funds to maintain private property. Your property. If this goes to court, it's not going to end well for her. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee mug. But Daniel, if you play this right, it doesn't have to go to court. I sat in silence for a moment, the implications settling in. Grace, I said finally, they've been threatening to fine me out of my home, because of my dad's sailboat. And now I find out they've been trespassing for 20 years. She nodded slowly. Then it's time we remind them that sometimes, the smallest piece of land can carry the biggest consequences. That night, I walked the path again, this time with new eyes. I stepped slowly, tracing the invisible line of ownership beneath my boots. This wasn't just dirt and gravel anymore. It was leverage. And in the hands of the right person, leverage can move mountains. Or in this case, tear down a fraudulent HOA empire one post at a time. The thing about leverage is, it only works if you know exactly when to pull. And I knew exactly when to pull. Karen Whitmore's charity Marina Gala had been plastered across every HOA bulletin board, group email, and social calendar for weeks. An evening of elegance by the water. The flyers read, complete with live jazz, catered hors d'oeuvres, and, most importantly, several big-name guests. Local business leaders, city council members, and even a sitting judge were scheduled to attend. It was more than just a fundraiser. It was a launch pad, a stage for Karen's husband, real estate developer Raymond Whitmore, to pitch his latest project, some visionary redevelopment plan for upscale lakeside condos. The Marina was supposed to be the jewel of that pitch. Too bad she didn't own the path to get there. I made the call to Cascade Fencing 4 days before the event. Out-of-county crew. No HOA ties. Discreet. Efficient. They arrived at 5 a.m. sharp on a clear Saturday morning. Fog still hugged the lake like a blanket as the workers unloaded cedar posts and concrete mix in my driveway. I walked them down the narrow path, my path, flanked by dew-covered grass and whispering pines. The exact line had already been marked with stakes by the surveyor. We weren't just building a fence, we were drawing a boundary in bloodless battle. By 7:30, the first few segments had gone up. Clean lines. 6 feet high. No trespassing signs gleaming in the dawn light like silent sentries. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I heard it. Screech! A silver Mercedes came flying around the bend and skidded to a halt in front of my house. Karen Whitmore stormed out in heels that made her look like she was trying to conquer Rome. Her perfectly curled blonde hair bouncing with every furious step. "What the hell is going on here?" she barked, pointing at the fence crew. I stepped down the porch calmly. "Good morning, Karen. Just doing some property maintenance." "You can't do this. That's community property. That's the access point for the marina." I didn't flinch. "Actually, this is private land. My land. Survey confirmed. County records confirmed. You've been trespassing for years." Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a goldfish gasping for air. "I'm calling the police," she snapped, reaching for her phone. "I'd recommend it," I replied, deadpan. "I already briefed them." "Want the officer's name?" Her face flushed crimson. 15 minutes later, a patrol car arrived. Officer Martinez stepped out, cool, collected, and clearly already informed. "Ma'am," he said after reviewing the documents, "Mr. Carter is within his rights. This is a civil property matter. No criminal violation here." Karen turned on me, voice low and venomous. "You're doing this because of the boat." "No," I said with a smile. "I'm doing this because you tried to erase my father's legacy and threaten my home over a made-up rule." "The fence? That's just me protecting what's mine." The real panic set in about an hour later. As the fence rose higher, neighbors began trickling out. Word spread like wildfire. Karen's fundraiser was blocked. The marina entrance was cut off. The musicians and caterers showed up with nowhere to unload. The valet service circled aimlessly. By noon, the sidewalk in front of my house looked like the losing end of a political coup. Karen paced with her phone glued to her ear, barking into it like a general losing ground. Her husband Raymond showed up around 1. His expensive loafers crunching nervously on the gravel as he tried to reason with me. "You're making a big mistake, Daniel," he said with a fake smile and too much cologne. "This whole community is going to suffer." I handed him a folder with the survey maps, a copy of the deed, and photos of the sailboat that started it all. "You want access to the marina?" I said, coolly. "Then we'll discuss terms, my terms." Karen returned just as he flipped through the papers. Her face went pale. "You picked the wrong guy to push," I said, locking eyes with her. "I don't fold. I build fences." The last section was completed at 4:57 p.m., 3 minutes before the first VIP guest was scheduled to arrive. The entrance to the marina now featured a beautiful cedar gate with a black steel latch. And I had the only key. If the fence was my first strike, what came next was the knockout punch. The day after the fundraiser disaster, I received a message that would blow the entire situation wide open. It was a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. I have information about Karen and Thomas you'll want to hear. Martin Whitmore." I stared at the name. Martin Whitmore. Karen's ex-husband. The one she never mentioned. The one who, rumor had it, left Lakeside Estates years ago under mysterious circumstances. We met at a quiet coffee shop in town the next morning. Martin was in his mid-50s. Balding. wearing a faded flannel and eyes that had clearly seen too much HOA drama. "I've been watching," he said, nursing a black coffee. "What you did with that fence, brilliant. I figured it was time someone stood up to her." "Why me?" I asked. "Why now?" Martin leaned in. "Because I know what they're doing. What they've been planning since before our divorce." He opened a worn tablet case and slid it toward me. Inside were digital folders, property records, emails, meeting notes, years of documentation. Karen and her new husband, Thomas Radcliffe, a real estate developer, had been quietly buying up lakefront properties for 3 years. They used shell companies like Radcliffe Green Ventures LLC and Lakeview Equity Holdings, both traced back to Thomas's law firm office in Portland. Their plan? Transform lakeside estates into a luxury resort community. "They're targeting vulnerable homeowners," Martin said. "Elderly couples, divorced residents, people who don't have the fight left in them. They use the HOA to make their lives miserable, harassment letters, fines, threats of legal action. Then they swoop in and offer to buy the house at a generous discount." My stomach turned as I flipped through the PDFs. Addresses, property sales, transactions 10 to 20% below market value, HOA violation notices issued shortly before each sale. "And the Marina?" I asked. Martin nodded. "Their crown jewel. Thomas has plans to convert it into a private dock for short-term luxury rentals. That fundraiser was supposed to be their big reveal." "You blocked it perfectly." I was stunned. What began as a petty attack on my sailboat had been a strategic move in a multi-million-dollar scheme to hijack our neighborhood. That night, I called Grace and Bob. We met on my back deck under the soft glow of string lights. The lake dark and quiet behind us. "This isn't just a turf war," I said. "It's a land grab. A hostile takeover." Grace took one look at Martin's files and let out a low whistle. "Oh. They're done." Bob, ever the stoic retired Navy man, just said, "Let's bring the neighborhood together." We didn't wait. Flyers went out that night. Emergency HOA community meeting. Location, Daniel Carter's backyard. Agenda, the future of lakeside estates. By 7:30 p.m. the next evening, nearly 50 residents filled my lawn. Some brought lawn chairs. Others stood, arms crossed. Karen and Thomas were noticeably absent. I took the makeshift podium, just an upside-down cooler, and cleared my throat. "I thought this started with a boat," I began, holding up the first HOA violation notice. But it turns out, it started with a lie. The next 20 minutes were a firestorm of facts. I presented the survey proving the Marina path was mine. Then the violation letters, harassment. Then the shell companies, proof that Karen and Thomas had been using their power in the HOA to artificially devalue homes. Then buy them through third-party fronts. Gasps echoed through the yard. Neighbors turned to each other in disbelief. A few elderly residents wiped tears from their eyes. Grace stepped forward with a binder in hand. "As a licensed attorney, I've reviewed the HOA's financials. Funds were misappropriated. At least $48,000 redirected to maintenance initiatives linked to Thomas's development plans. No board approval. No community vote." Then came the bombshell. Martin stepped up, introduced himself, and explained how Karen had used their divorce settlement to quietly distance herself from legal liability, only to go full throttle with Thomas once the paper trail was cold. "She used this neighborhood like a monopoly board," he said. "But the game's over." Someone in the crowd shouted, "I move we vote to remove the HOA board." And the lawn erupted. As neighbors raised hands, Thomas and Karen arrived, too late. Karen's eyes scanned the crowd, full of betrayal and fire. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You don't have the authority." Bob stood, arms folded. "We do tonight." By the end of that night, the vote was unanimous. 52 residents, each one tired of the lies, the fines, the fear, raised their hands and chose a new path. The old HOA board was dissolved on the spot. Karen Whitmore and her hand-picked enablers, including her husband Thomas, were stripped of their positions. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just stood there, surrounded by the people she had once ruled like a petty queen. Her carefully curated world crumbling under the weight of her own ambition. "This isn't over," she muttered as she backed away. But the truth was, it already was. The next morning, Bob Martinez was sworn in as interim HOA president. Grace Monroe accepted the role of vice president. And the rest of the board was filled with residents the neighborhood trusted, people who had lived, built, and belonged here for years. Not developers. Not opportunists. They offered me a seat on the board. I turned it down, but I agreed to serve as community advisor on property rights and legacy matters. It was their way of saying thank you. But truthfully, I didn't do it for the title. I did it for the whisperer, and for the father who taught me to hold the line. Even when the wind turned against you. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. An independent financial audit uncovered nearly $50,000 of HOA funds misused during Karen's presidency, funneling money into Marina beautification that just happened to line up with Thomas Radcliffe's resort plans. Grace filed ethics complaints. The state bar opened an inquiry into Thomas's law firm. Karen's real estate license was suspended pending review. Within a month, the Whitmores quietly listed their lakefront home for sale. Rumor had it, they moved to Scottsdale, far from Greenvine, far from the lake, far from the community they tried to hijack. We didn't throw a party when they left. We didn't need to. The celebration came in quieter ways. The new board rewrote the bylaws. Transparent voting, term limits, homeowner referendums for any major changes. Grace insisted on publishing quarterly financial statements. And Bob, bless the man, cancelled every outstanding violation issued during Karen's reign. Even Eleanor Jenkins got her bird feeders back. And as for the fence, it stayed. But not as a wall. We replaced the lock with a beautiful wooden gate, stained mahogany, with a brass plaque bolted just above the handle. Private property, easement by community trust. We negotiated a fair access agreement. I retained ownership of the land, and the HOA paid a small annual fee for community access. But more than that, they acknowledged what had happened. And they honored it. The whisperer never moved from my dock. Not even an inch. In fact, she was officially recognized at the first community meeting under the new board, a symbol of legacy, resistance, and resilience. A month later, on a clear spring morning, I hoisted the sails again. The lake was calm, sun shimmering on the water. But I wasn't alone. In the cockpit sat two kids from down the block, twins, barefoot, wide-eyed, and buzzing with questions. "How do you know where the wind is?" one asked. "You don't," I said with a grin. "You learn to listen." That summer, I started offering free sailing lessons to neighborhood kids every Saturday. Parents brought coffee. Some brought snacks. And the dock, once a place of quiet defiance, became a place of joy. Music played again. Cookouts returned. And slowly, Lakeside Estates began to feel like the dream we all thought it was when we moved here. Karen tried to control the narrative, but I wrote the ending. And the whisperer? She didn't just weather the storm. She became the lighthouse, a reminder that sometimes standing up to power doesn't mean shouting the loudest. It means holding your ground when it matters most. This isn't just a story about a boat, or a corrupt HOA, or a man with a fence. It's a story about knowing when to fight, and knowing that some things, like legacy, like community, like your father's hand on the tiller, are worth defending every single time.